I was very excited to do that, and I wrote several versions of this. I think 12 drafts of Total Recall. At a certain point, Ronald Shusett said to me, "Well, you know what you've done. You've written the Phillip K. Dick version." I said, "Well, I thought that's what we were supposed to do. It is based on a Phillip K. Dick story. I love Philip Dick. That's what I thought we were doing." He said, "No, we want this movie to be like Raiders of the Lost Ark Go to Mars." I said, "Well, okay, I'm not doing that movie." So I said goodbye.
The creator of Total Recall was a man named Philip K. Dick. When he was just 23, he began publishing science fiction stories for magazines and made very little money. Philip also wrote many books, and he stated in 1960 that he was willing to take 20 or 30 years to succeed as a literary writer. Unfortunately, his prediction was very close to home because the many books he wrote in the 60s were passed over by the big publishers. So he settled for small publishing houses to promote his books, and he made little money in comparison. To get by, he wrote frantically and often in deep financial straits. Throughout his life, he was consumed by drug addictions, 5 marriages, erratic behavior that sometimes came off as delusional or hallucinogenic. He stated one time that he lived 2 parallel lives, one as himself, Philip K. Dick, and one as Thomas, a Christian persecuted by the Romans in the 1st century A.D. He would later go on to claim he was possessed by the biblical prophet Elijah, and he would believe some of the elements in his own novels as being part of Elijah's prophecies. This erratic and sometimes spontaneous mindset affected his real life as well. In one case, he went to a science fiction convention in February 1972, and within 24 hours, he said he fell in love with a woman named Janice, and would move to Vancouver, which was the site of the convention where he met her. Their relationship would last 1 month before Philip tried to take his own life by overdosing. The metaphysical issues that plagued Philip was tied to some of his writings, and he questioned what reality was. One such story would be We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which appeared in an April issue of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction in 1966, and this was the blueprint for what later would become Total Recall. The story begins with a clerk dreaming of Mars and then is awakened by his cross wife, Kristen. Doug Quayle gets up for some coffee, snorts some Dean Swift snuff, and Kristen begins to lecture him about his obsession with Mars. She points out that they can take a week off and go to the bottom of the ocean and visit an aquatic resort rather than that dustball planet. Doug leaves for work as she eyes him in annoyance. Doug then goes to Recall as he wrote to that company before his visit and has mused over the idea for some time. He just wants to get away. Although it is expensive, it is cheaper than taking the trip itself. As he sits in the office of Dr. McLean, he has doubts about doing the procedure and questions if a fake memory will work. McLean shows him souvenirs and items he will be provided after the memory is implanted, and states if he doubts any memory, he can have a full refund, even though he won't remember Recall or being there. To heighten the deal, the idea of him being a secret agent is offered, and he takes it. While Quayle goes to the procedure, McLean gets 2 packets of physical items that will be given to Quayle when he leaves as souvenirs of his experience. One folder has a code book, a pellet-sized transmitter, what seems to be a sidearm. He muses that they must do 20 of these procedures a month to make their money. However, McLean is called to the procedure quickly, and when he arrives, he finds out that Doug is under sedation, but he is still conscious, and accuses the team calmly that they blew his cover. Doug thinks he's under truth serum and is very lethargic. He wonders aloud if his wife is an agent meant to keep him under surveillance. He then zones out, and they decide to dump Quayle into a cab and stupidly refund only half his fees. When in the cab, Quayle sees his refund for 1/2 of his fee returned and is shocked at seeing the name Recall as he's been thinking about it beforehand. He tells the robot cab driver to return him to the business, and he calls his wife Kristen from the car phone. He tells her he has actually been to Mars, and she says he's drunk. He tries to convince her, but she hangs up on him. Quayle arrives back to recall, and the receptionist said they never gave him a trip, and he replies that he remembers being there, talking to McLean, and being administered a sedative. When he sees McLean, he is quite angry and threatens to speak to the Better Business Bureau, and McLean quickly capitulates. They not only refund him, but they offer him 570 more credits in the form of a cashier's check as an apology. After giving him the check, he tells Quayle not to mention any trip to Mars with anyone, as McLean knows Quayle is really an agent, even though his past client doesn't realize this. As he is sitting in front of his desk at home preparing to write a letter of complaint against recall to the Better Business Bureau Terra Division, he opens his drawer and sees a familiar box he's overlooked for some time. In it, there are Mars artifacts, and he remembers discovering them. It is then that Kristen opens the door, and like always, she starts berating him. Why are you home in the middle of the day? He argues with her that he went to Mars, and she flatly tells him she is going to leave him. When he tries to talk with her some more, she simply puts down her bag of groceries and leaves, telling him this is goodbye. Doug is actually relieved she is out of his life, and after the door closes, he is told by a man who is hiding in the room to put up his hands. The man with the gun is wearing a uniform of the Interplan Police Agency. He tells Quayle that he was tracked by a telepathic transmitter in his brain. He tells Quayle that anything he thinks may be used against him. There is a page or two of exposition here where they talk about his memories, the danger recall is in for knowing about him, and another cop enters. Quayle has a thought and realizes something he did in the past, and the first police officer seems to panic. Well, this is a far worse problem now. As bad as it can get, we've got to kill you, and right away. The other cop argues they should dump him somewhere and not kill him, while Quayle says aloud that he killed a man after getting past 15 bodyguards and they were all armed. Quayle then has total recall of his time as an assassin, and when a gun fires, he instinctively activates and escapes before thinking to the police, "If you follow me, I'll kill you, so don't." Later, Doug is wondering what to do and muses to himself. But then suddenly, a voice contacts him via a transmitter in his brain. Doug wants to just exist and pleads with whomever it is on the other end to give him new memories, something that he can be content with as he knows there is no way he can achieve a life considering these circumstances. The voice speaking in his head agrees and tells Quayle to turn himself in at New York. The voice states he served them well in the past, and if they can fulfill his desires, they will, and they owe him. But if the memory can't stick, they will have to terminate him. After turning himself in, a psychologist tells him that they will put a memory where Quayle stops an invasion of Earth by being merciful to aliens, and the creatures decided that as long as Quayle was alive, Earth would not be invaded. Thus, with this new memory, he would be content being just alive and would not seek out other contentment. In the room is McLean, who the government brought in to help since he knows Quayle's existence. McLean, under pressure, is threatened if he can't make the memory stick. At recall, they gather a packet of mementos for Quayle to give him physical ties to his new memories. One is a rod that the aliens gave Quayle as a token of gratitude. Although it has no properties, Quayle will remember using it once for something very important. He is also given a document from the UN Secretary General thanking him for saving Earth. There is also a scroll in an alien language stating who the aliens were and where they came from with star maps. When Quaid is sedated and before the new memories are implanted, he begins talking again and states that he saved Earth from aliens and was given a rod that turns a person invisible. But he used it for the government to kill a man while evading his 15 guards. McLean walks out of the room knowing that he no longer needs packets of mementos to convince Quayle of his memories. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale has a common theme that is in many Phillip K. Dick works, in that he believed that the world itself is not entirely reality, and later the world would realize his messaging in not only Total Recall but Blade Runner, which was based off of his novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Other works of Philip K. Dick was The Man in the High Castle, which was made in 2015 by Amazon Studios. Minority Report was made into a movie of the same name in 2002, and many of his other works were later turned into films when he became popular after his death. When 1974 came around, Philip was struggling to make ends meet, and another writer who planned on going to Hollywood showed up, offering him $1,000 for the rights to We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. The writer was Ronald Shusett. Shusett was a theater arts major out of UCLA who loved theater but couldn't stand working in New York because it was so cold, so he decided to go to film. The following year, Dark Star came out. He was drawn to the sci-fi film because Total Recall would require some pretty smart people who could do special effects for cheap, and the team who did Dark Star could probably do that. He reached out to John Carpenter, but they didn't mesh well. Then he talked to Dan O'Bannon. At the beginning, Shusett and O'Bannon hit it off great. Shusett decided O'Bannon could help him with Total Recall. The script hadn't been started yet, and Dan was also a writer. It was then that O'Bannon said he was working on a script for a movie called Star Beast, and told him about the idea about an alien movie that involved truckers in space. After Shusett read what he had, they decided to become a team to focus on Star Beast first, because it would be cheaper and easier to achieve in comparison to Total Recall. Shusett and O'Bannon's collaboration was cut short when O'Bannon was asked to contribute to Alexandre Jodorowsky's Dune. He went to France to work on the project, and the two kept in touch often, promising that they would both help each other out after Dune was finished. Dune was a miraculous idea of a 14-hour movie that went totally bust. And if you haven't seen the documentary of Jodorowsky's Dune, I would recommend that film documentary over countless others. The project defined who Dan wanted to work with on Alien, and was the meeting point of O'Bannon and H.R. Giger, which was the key to making Alien so unique. While O'Bannon was in France, Shusett struggled to get by. He just couldn't crack Alien without Dan, and Total Recall wasn't moving forward. He knew without his writing friend he couldn't move forward, and this terribly discouraged him. So Shusett's wife suggested he talk to a priest to clear his head. This is what Shusett recalled about that meeting.
Just wait for a miracle. As your miracle's coming, somebody's going to call you, and they're going to start, and all the doors in Hollywood are going to open to you. And so I was elated, of course. Oh my God. I said, it sounded so convincing, you know. And then about a month later, I get the call from Dan. Ron, can I sleep on your couch? A new thing had called off, and I can't get anything done. Dan, you're my miracle. He said, what? I told him a true story. Ron, that guy tells everybody that. He's full of bullshit. Maybe we'll get it made, maybe we won't.
When Dan returned to the States because there was no money left, he had nothing. No job, no money, and no prospects. He moved in with Shusett, and desperately, he began working on his Star Beast script. Shusett would give input, and sometimes that input was vital to what Alien became, such as the facehugger scene that Shusett imagined to get the alien on the ship. As the two shopped the script around, they found a new studio named Brandywine. The studio purchased the script, and soon Fox Studios gave the film a green light, as Ridley Scott would direct the now classic Alien in 1978. The film would release in 1979. When Alien released, Shusett was an item now, but O'Bannon still struggled. Though Shusett was very happy with the events of Alien, especially since he had a producing credit, O'Bannon felt slighted by the underhanded dealings of Brandywine executives and felt he was not given any respect, and many of his gripes were justified. After Alien, Disney was very impressed and made a development deal with the successful producer, and he went to work on Total Recall while O'Bannon was his collaborator. The two would sit down and start fleshing out Phillip K. Dick's work into a script, which was now called Total Recall, and O'Bannon stated that the short story did not work as a movie. Dick's story is short. It ends very abruptly. You cannot take that particular story and simply inflate it up to a full-length piece. So Shusett asked him what they should do from there, and Dan quickly responded, "We take him to Mars." O'Bannon and Shusett threw around ideas, and the two really didn't see eye to eye on how to end the film. I said that I thought the rest of the movie should be a cross between Casablanca and James Bond movie. He said, "I don't agree at all. I think it should be a Western on Mars, Pancho Villa on Mars." I said that was a terrible idea, and I wasn't going to write it. So he went off and found some other schlemazel to write it as a Western on Mars. So after some months, he comes back to me saying that he wrote it, but that nobody likes it, and he was willing to try my approach. So I wrote another act and got him to Mars. I figured out what the third act should be, and at that point, Ronnie yanked it away from me again and ran off and again got some other guy to write a third act, and everybody hated it. So he came back again, and I sat down and wrote the third act at his request. The first script finished completely by Dan O'Bannon, Total Recall, had Douglas Quayle dreaming of a Martian pyramid. He wakes up, goes to Recall, and after his ego agent persona erupts, Quayle heads to Mars, and by the end of the film, he discovers a machine with a handprint on it. When Quaid puts his hand on the machine, he receives Total Recall and realizes exactly who he is. In this script, there is a huge twist here, where we discover that Agent Quayle found an alien component and discovered the Martian machine, which actually killed him and made him an indestructible clone of his previous self. The synthetic can't be killed because it is so quick to anticipate danger before it happens. Quayle is also the resurrection of the Martian race in a synthetic body. The government on Earth has no idea what to do with this clone, so they wipe its memory and send it to Earth thinking if they can make the persona of the clone ordinary, they can control it. At the end of the script, Quayle turns to all the other characters and says, "It's going to be fun to play God." Phillip K. Dick would read this screenplay in 1982 just before he died, and O'Bannon stated that he enjoyed it. Despite this, Ron was rewriting the script, not satisfied with the ending, and wanted to tweak the elements. He also employed other writers, and one was Stephen Pressfield, who we will explore in a moment. Despite the constant evolutions to the script, Disney lost faith with Total Recall project, so they passed on it. And that is when Dino De Laurentis stepped in and made a deal to make the movie. Now, for full disclosure, there was a script that existed before David Cronenberg was selected as a director in 1984 that included the author-screenwriter Stephen Pressfield. The problem with Total Recall is that there are just so many scripts, and most are not dated. You can usually identify when the scripts came out by the mutants, because once Cronenberg got involved, he was very interested in adding a society of mutants into the script. However, the Pressfield script is before Cronenberg, and of course it wasn't dated, and there is little info about it. But it does state it's the 5th revision. Thus, I am placing this script here before we get into the massive changes Cronenberg would add to the film. I think it's interesting to see an earlier script of the film, and this is one of the earliest ones I could find. The script begins with a sphinx-like structure, and one of its eyes on the monument blows open as fragments fly towards the camera. Inside the structure, Quayle is running as the ground is falling away, and it is then that Doug Quayle wakes up next to his wife wife, Kirsten. She is unsympathetic, like the original story, and tells him they can't even scrap together $10,000 a week to do anything when he mentions going to Mars. At breakfast, Quayle is watching the news, and the current news story is how 4 women raped a man in a park. And Kirsten cynically states, "What do they expect? The way men dress these days. Then they scream rape." Kirsten is very cold, like Philip Dick's version, calling Quayle a half-wit and telling him to go to hell when he asks to go to Mars before she tells him he's late for work. On his way, he passes through a weapon check where everyone's weapon must be inspected by security. One of the guards actually lectures Quayle that he needs to be carrying a sidearm, as it's been the law since 1990 due to Earth's crime problems. Quayle says he's afraid of guns, but the guard says he better have one tomorrow. On the train, Quayle sees a commercial from Recall. At work, he sits in an office at a dead-end cubicle job where if he types too slowly, the computer will report it. When he slows typing thinking about Recall, the computer asks him, "Why have you stopped? Request more information." We then cut to Recall, where McClane does his sales pitch, but Quayle does not commit, still trying to live his life and save money. However, that night, while Quayle is at home, his wife Kirsten is watching a near-pornographic film on TV, and Quayle warns her that it's illegal to watch that kind of stuff, to which Kirsten replies, "Yeah, who's going to report me? You, wimp?" Screwing around's illegal too, but just give me half a chance. The next day, Quayle follows through with Recall and begins the procedure. Like the film, the Recall folks discover Quayle is actually an agent and they blew his cover. They erase all records and throw him in a cab. When Quayle gets home, he is intercepted by 2 agents who try to detain him, but he kills them before racing up to the apartment. Kirsten turns out to be a double agent, and she tries to kill Quayle, and their following conversation is much like the movie, with the exception that she mentions she's bored with the assignment because his personality wasn't too thrilling. He leaves and she doesn't follow him. Quayle is chased by some men, but gets away in the subway and later gets in a cab. The cab is fired upon, and the robot driver tells him to leave the cab. Since the cab won't drive with him in it, he flees, finally ending up at a hotel where he receives a phone call from the friend agent seen in the film. Like the film, he is instructed to put a wet towel on his head, and then he is given an address to get more information. The people tracking him loses the signal. In this version of the screenplay, the agent friend has a name, Scott Stevens, and the scene would continue with him hanging up and walking away. He would then be killed by 2 agents who discovered him in a bathroom. When Quayle arrives at the address, it's a pawn shop, and when he gives a code name, he is given a case. When he gets to a safe spot, he opens the case, which has passports, a wire-like tool, a cassette recorder, a silver mask for disguises, a hologram watch, money, and a spray can of some sort. Quayle discovers Hauser's message, and he removes the bug with the wire tool and the spray, which causes no pain. He then puts the bug in a rat hole and leaves the area quickly. We then cut to an information center where Cohagen is, and he is upset Quayle is evading them. It is argued that he might remember nothing, but Cohagen states that Quayle is doing things outside his current programming, and the tech reasons it may be instinct from his past identity. It is then that Cohagen, looking at the screen, sees Melina and tells the tech to stop on her picture. Disguised as a woman, Quayle goes on a space liner to Mars, and the passengers are watching Rocky 36 with Sylvester Stallone III Jr. in the lead role. He goes into the restroom and removes his disguise to disembark. There is no spaceport scene when Doug arrives on the planet. The scene then cuts to the Hilton Hotel as a child of Mars throws things at Quayle, calling him a smog sucker because he's an Earth tourist. After checking in, Quayle is given a parcel he left for himself, and it tells him to go see Melina Noel. and it has an address. He then heads there, meeting Benny the cab driver, who starts out just like he did in the film version. There is exposition where Benny tells Quail, while they wait in the last resort bar, that all the miners of the past who had claims on the planet are being bought out by Cohagen, and if they don't sell, the dictator will just shut off their air and take the claims after they're dead. It is then that Melina shows up, and they have a reunion much the same as in the film. Dr. Edgemar visits Quail in his hotel room, tries to convince Quail that he's in recall, but he is unconvinced. Then Melina, not Kirsten, enters the room, and she is referred to as Dr. Noel from Recall. Quail shoots Edgemar, and then Melina says to Quail, "Watch out, there are men with guns in the hall." Quail uses an explosion to take out the men coming to capture him, and Melina states that she was kidnapped and forced into this, otherwise they would kill him. They escape with Benny's help, who drives them out of danger during a car chase. Informed that Quail was not captured, Cohagen orders Operation Sphinx to begin, stating it will flush out Quail. Benny drives them into the Martian Liberation Front headquarters, which he and Melina are part of. When they get close to where they were going, a loudspeaker informs all residents on the planet that they must evacuate, as all air will be shut out within 24 hours planet-wide. Quail is told that Hauser tried to infiltrate the resistance, but Cohagen questioned his loyalties and gave him new memories to get rid of him. Benny takes Quail to Quato, who is actually a mutant that grows out of the neck of his host and reads Quail's mind. The memories seen with Quato are images of Hauser in Cohagen's office looking at Sphinx images and drawings. When approaching the main chamber of the Sphinx, a device shoots a bolt of lightning at Quaid, striking him. Then there is a scene where Hauser dances with Melina, and then he leaves her as she's in bed. We then see an image of Quail in a detention cell. Quail is then being strapped down as Cohagen is over him, and then the final vision of Quail wearing a thermal suit, running as the ground is falling around him as he escapes the Sphinx structure before gunshots are heard. Then he wakes up to find Benny standing over a dead Quato and Melina trying to calm him. Shocked, he turns to Benny asking why they killed him, and Benny states, "No choice, boss. It was him or you." Quail rises, having total recall, and tells them they are heading to the Sphinx. He explains that the race who built the machine in the Sphinx also created the atmosphere on Earth, and they just never turned it on Mars, and he's going to turn it on. He states vaguely that elements in the Martian core releases oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen into the atmosphere and will terraform the planet. He also explains that Cohagen is buying all the miners' property and claims, so he will own everything after he turns on the atmosphere, creating a high-value world. Finally, Quail states that he knows how to turn on the machine, but it was Melina who distracted him, and he fell for her. Thus, Cohagen wiped his memory to control Quail for future use. It is then that Benny betrays Quail and Melina. He has a mechanical arm like a Swiss Army knife, and he brings out a buzzsaw when melee combat begins. Quail and Melina defeat him by putting on suits and depressurizing the room while Benny implodes. Quail uses a mole machine to get to the Sphinx, but they have to deal with guards using the hologram watch like the film. Instead of taking an elevator up, Quail and Melina climb up the Sphinx from outside and blow up one of the eyes of the monument to access the machine. In the final confrontation, Cohagen tells Doug he'll die if he turns on the machine, but Doug turns it on and all the Sphinx activates. Cohagen fights Quail and dies. Then Quail runs, just like we saw in the first vision and the Quato vision, as the ground falls apart around him and he runs for a bright light. When he gets to the light, he finds Miners and Melina there in a shuttle helping him up. He survived. It is then that Mars gets its atmosphere. Melina looks to Quail and states, "Recall could have never come up with anything like this." Then the movie ends, as everyone takes off their helmets, breathing the new air. This version of the script wouldn't even last a year, though. By 1984, David Cronenberg would be brought on the project, and he was noted to write 12 separate drafts himself while taking a year to tool it. And we will go more into that in our next video. Until then, take care of yourself and make sure you have some food before our next video.
We eat. My stomach is starting to sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger gasping for air at the end of Total Recall.
Yeah, my eyes are popping out at the end of this movie.
We also wanted to shout out a friendly channel named Cinema Gulp. They do movie reviews and a couple other things, so check them out, and if you like them, help them to get to 1,000 subscribers. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Use super thanks. It helps.